here we are, week 9, MyStats Lab, problem 5 example. And in this problem we have a technology committee that has stated the average time spent by students per lab visit has increased, and guess what? They want more money. Yep, they need to increase their lab fees. So to substantiate this claim, they have randomly sampled 12 students' lab visits, and we have their times listed here. The first part of the problem, part A, asks us to plot the data and asks us, are there any observations, outliers? Okay, so what are we going to do? Let's make a histogram. How do we do that? Well, we've probably already done that early in the semester, but let's go ahead and do it again. So let's go to Insert. We need a pivot table to make a histogram. We'll click on Pivot Table. It asks us for our data range, which is our data here. So we have that in there. We'll click OK. Now we can create our pivot table. So in the field list, we'll click on time. We're going to left click down here on sum of time, and we're going to check value field settings. So we click on that. We need a count to do our bins. We'll click OK. Now we can take the time and drag it down to row labels, and there we've count our time. Now we actually need to group these into fields or bins. So I'm going to get off of that row label there, go up here at the top, we'll click on Group Field, and we're going to start at 0 as the problem asks us, and it also asks us to use bins of 5. So we'll check that also, make it by 5s, click OK, and there we have. There are our bins. We've distributed it by 5s, going from 0 up to 125. So let's create our histogram. So we're going to go to the top, hit the Insert tab, column. We're going to use a 2D column, and there we have it. Now, we know that a histogram doesn't have any spaces between the bars, so let's right click on one of the bars, and where it says Format Data Series, we'll click there, and we'll close those gap widths to 0. Close that, and there we have it. There's our histogram. Now we're asked about outliers. Well, let's look across the bottom for where our range is, and you'll see we go from 0 to 4, then we go all the way to 40. And then we stay pretty consistent. We get to 74, and the next thing you know, we're at 120. So what is it telling us? Without going and putting the gaps in there where we have zeros, is we have outliers. We have one at the top, we have one at the bottom. And if you look at our data, and conveniently right at the bottom, there are our 2 outliers, 125 and 4. So yes, we do have outliers here. And there you go, part A. Part B asks us to do confidence intervals, 95% confidence intervals. We're to do one with the outliers and one without. So I have all of our data listed here again, and we'll use Excel to create our formula. We'll make all of our data shown here, and we will find our confidence interval that way. Then we're going to do it a little bit easier. We'll look at PHStat, how it does it in a few minutes. So the first thing we need is our mean, and we already know, of course, that the mean is the average. So in Excel we can say equals, start typing average, there it is there, double click on that, and we will include all of our data, close our brackets, hit enter, and there we have our sample mean. Sample deviation we can do the same way. Equals, start typing standard deviation, there it is, double click, we'll include all of our data again, close our brackets, enter, and there we have our sample standard deviation. Now we know from the problem n here, or we can count over there, n is 12. We can put in 12. we also need the standard error. Of course, we remember how to do this, right? So the standard error is the standard deviation divided by the square root of n. So here we can put in that equals our standard deviation divided by, start typing square root. There it is, double click. We'll choose n here, close our brackets, enter, and there is our standard error. Now for this we also need our critical t, and as the problem states, we can find that in our textbook on page A38 in your text. So if you go to A38, we have degrees of freedom here, n minus 1, so we're at 11. So go down to the side of where the degrees of freedom are shown to 11 and go across. We're doing a 95% confidence interval. So at the top where we have 2 tail and 1 tail, we're at 0.05 and 0.25. We come across and we find that our critical t is 2.201. We can add that there. So now we need to know our margin of error. We know that formula also, right? It's basically our critical t times our standard error. So equals standard error times critical t, enter, and there we have our margin of error, 17.504. So now we can create our confidence interval. We'll need our mean plus or minus our error there, and there's our mean. We just created the error there, so we can go in equals sample mean minus, there's our lower limit, same thing for the upper. We'll take their mean plus, back up, let's put it down here where it belongs, right? Equals the standard mean plus, and there we have it. The lower limit is 37.58, the upper limit 72.59, and we write it as we have it here. The 95% confidence interval, including outliers, is 37.58, 72.59. Now it also asks us to do it without outliers. Basically the same thing. Let's look at it. I've already put in our calculations, but now we have 10 pieces of data because we left off the 4 and the 125. So we will calculate our sample mean the same way. The average here, standard deviation, the same thing here. Now we change n to 10. So we can calculate our standard error with our new sample standard deviation and our new n. Critical t in the back of the book on page 838. Now our degrees of freedom are 9. Come across to the same box there and we find 2.262. Multiply the standard error times the critical t. We get our ME at 6.809. Same way as before, just left off those 2 outliers, and we get a new confidence interval, 46.39 and 60.01. Okay, not hard, but it does take a little bit of time. But how about pH stat? Why don't we let that do the work for us? So I've recreated our data again here, and this time let's go to pH stat 2 and let it do the work. So at the top we'll click on our add-ins, we'll go to pH stat 2, and we're going to find confidence intervals, and we're going to select estimate for the mean sigma unknown. What does that mean? Well, that means we do not know the standard deviation of the population. So we'll click on that, and it asks us for a simple amount of data, the sample size, and if we're doing the with the outliers, our sample size is 12. Our sample mean, if we remember that from the first part, sample mean is 55.083. The sample standard deviation 27.550, and that's all we need. Click OK, and there we have it. Everything's there. Our t-value shows up here, and there's our confidence interval, just like we did in part A with the outliers, 37.58 to 72.59. A lot easier, isn't it? But you can do it either way. Excel makes it easier for us to do the confidence intervals with our regular formulas or with PHStat2. So there you have it. Week 9, My Stats Lab, Problem 5 example is done. See you next time.